Coming back here now to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. On to the third segment on Jason Kelce, the longtime Eagles center, and how the Eagles plan to move on from him. An interesting segment with a lot of options to talk about. But before I get into that, for one more time in this show, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have that may pop into your head while watching the show on any of the topics that I've talked about already. If you can't see the tip and donations link, it's gsmcpodcast.net. This just ensures that your question gets put to the top of the line on this right-hand side of me in the chat box. I'm able to see it, read the question on air, as well as interact with you guys and any thoughts that you may have. It's greatly appreciated every time you guys use this with any questions, comments during the show. It's a big help for the show. And like I said, we greatly appreciate it every time anyone's able to do that. Now, back to Jason Kelce. The Philadelphia Eagles lost one of their more impactful players just a few days ago on Monday. Jason Kelce called it quits on a 13-year career. A very emotional press conference that he held there with all his family there in the Eagles facility. He gave a great speech there, and now the Eagles have to accept this reality of moving forward with one of their more beloved players and people that have come through Philadelphia sports. And this is a big hurdle for the Philadelphia Eagles just because they also have a lot of other things to work out and think about in terms of, personnel, their coaching staff figuring out how to fix that, because last year we saw that transition from Jonathan Gannon and Sean Steichen, them leaving, and then Brian Johnson coming in, and the transition from that wasn't as smooth as they would have hoped. There was a lot of turmoil around that, around Sirianni as well, and not to mention some of the players that they still have to figure out as well. There's trade rumors around Hassan Reddick. There's been reports that they have allowed him to seek a trade for himself on another team. There's talks about, that secondary, trying to improve that. They don't really have an established safety that's up to the level of what they used to have. Reed Blankenship is there. He's a solid player. I like him, but they definitely need more than just him there. There's rumors around CJ Gardner-Johnson coming back, but they have to figure all that out. Their linebackers are not the best. And along their defensive line, they have Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham that are free agents. They're much older, so it might be harder to work out a deal for them to come back if they want them back. But they're also 2 and 3 on the top 3 locker room guys that the Eagles had last season. They just lost one officially in Jason Kelce. Can they afford to lose the other 2 and, try and deal with the leadership aspect of the Eagles locker room? Because that's a big thing, obviously, in the NFL. And you could rest assured that if there are problems, if there are turmoils on the sidelines, the leadership will be one of the first things brought up for this Eagles team. But sticking with Kelce and really honing in on what they can do to replace him, they're fortunate in the sense that they still have Jordan Mailata, Dickerson at the guard position as well. He's a great pick that they had in the draft a few years ago in the second round. And Lane Johnson, a surefire Hall of Famer, as the right tackle. So now they have to figure out the center and right guard or left guard, depending where Dickerson goes. And I think one of the most sound and reasonable expected replacements for Jason Kelce could be Cam Jurgens, already on the team. Played right guard last year because obviously Jason Kelce was still there. But he was drafted by the Eagles in the second round just in 2022 out of Nebraska. And he was considered to be one of the best centers in that draft. But the Eagles took him regardless. He played right guard last year because Isaac Seumalo moved on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Cam Jurgens stepped in a different position on the O-line, not his natural position, but he did solid enough for them to have a decent record overall last season. But now all the reports, all the indications show that he would naturally slide to his more comfortable position on that offensive line. Now, it seems easy, a simple transition, but how is it going to look for Cam Jurgens? The O line might seem similar, all the positions might seem similar, but it's definitely a very big difference along the left side of the offensive line if you play there, on the right side if you play center, guard. It's all very different in it. Each of them have their own little quirks and little things that you have to get used to, habits that players build up. Just sensory, touching the person to your left or to the right, being surrounded with all the blocking assignments and stuff like that. He's lucky that he's done that already for the majority of his life, but he hasn't done it for 2 seasons now with Kelce being there. And you could say that he's practiced there. It's not the same thing. Once you do it in a real game, that real pass rush, that pressure that gets put on you by the defensive lineman, it's going to feel relatively new for Cam Jurgens, snapping the ball and then getting ready to block. But it could be a smooth transition because he's already done it, like I mentioned. But on the other hand, he has also had a decent amount of injuries as well. He didn't play his rookie season at all. And last year, like I mentioned, he was at right guard. He started 11 games, but he also dealt with injuries on top of that. So, staying healthy, being out there on the field is huge to build that repetition with Jalen Hurts and with the rest of the offensive line, because at times, if you're an established center, if you're really commanding that offensive line, you have to pick out blitz packages, assign the blocking assignments to everyone, know where the blitz are coming from, and help the quarterback in that aspect. And, it's all going to be new for Cam Jurgens. There's definitely going to be hiccups along the road, but he seems like the more likely option right now. And on the other hand, if you want to look elsewhere, free agency potentially for the Eagles, they're lucky that this free agent market is shaping up to be one of the more talented and just top-heavy classes that I've seen in recent memory, just following football and knowing it. There's a lot of options outside of them. You could go from Dalton Risner from the Vikings. He's only 28 years old. Nick Allegretti, who played in the Super Bowl for the Kansas City Chiefs, who stepped in there. He was mostly a backup, but he did very well in the Super Bowl. Evan Brown from the Seattle Seahawks, a free agent for the Eagles that they could re-sign and try out at one of the guard positions in Iosoa Opita or Jack Driscoll, both young guys at 27 years old. You could try them out at the guard position and see how that goes. But if not, there are other guards out there that are still very well established and very talented and even very young in some cases, like Cody Ford from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's only 27 years old. I had Kevin Dotson on this sheet, but just before the show, just minutes before the show, he signed an extension with the Los Angeles Rams to go back there. So he's not an option anymore, clearly. But there's always John Runyon from the Green Bay Packers. He's 26 years old. And Mike Onwenu from the New England Patriots, who had to be released because they placed the tag on Kyle Duggar. So Onwenu was going to be a free agent, and he hits the market now. And some of these younger guys that are, still in their mid-20s-ish, a John Runyon, a Dalton Risner, a Cody Ford, might cost a little bit more, but you still definitely have cheaper options like Allegretti, as I mentioned, and Evan Brown, or you re-sign some of the guys that you've already had in the building, in the offensive line room, in Opita or Jack Driscoll. All those kind of are the safer option if you want to look elsewhere to improve the rest of your team. They already had to make some free agency cuts in Avonte Maddox to get under that salary cap. They might not be able to keep Hassan Reddick because those reports, like I mentioned earlier, say that they've allowed him to seek a trade. But on top of that, it was reported that he could be seeking a bit more money. So obviously that's not going to work with Philadelphia. So they're going to have to get over that. And just going off the field a little bit here for the Eagles and trying to replace them, they're at an interesting spot where, just in their division in terms of big picture, projecting past Jason Kelce and where this team could end up, I mentioned the leadership thing before and who's going to step up if Fletcher Cox, who's rumored to be seriously considering retirement, and if they don't bring Brandon Graham back, who's first going to be the leader of that team? And once you do establish those leaders, how are they going to deal with it and add extra pressure from it? And as well, this is a pretty crucial season for Jalen Hurts in the sense that not only does he have to now figure out that new relationship with a new center, that communication, that exchange with a new center. A big part of their offense was the tush push, and that exchange between Jalen Hurts and Jason Kelce might not seem important at all to some people with how fast the play goes down and how quickly they just get the first down. But that also comes with experience that Jason Kelce has of being a veteran, knowing all the tricks and everything like that. Is Cam Jurgens going to be able to execute that to the same level? And if he can't, how different are they going to look without having that tool in their back pocket to pull out every time they need a crucial down to get? That's one thing. But going back to the Jalen Hurts thing, more on him, this could be a big year for him just because he's not coming off a very impressive year last year. And there was a lot of turnovers, a lot of interceptions, a lot of indecisiveness, it seemed, in his throws. You could put that on the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, and all the turmoil that they had there. But in the same breath, he showed great talent 2 years prior or a year prior to last season. And to see that drop off, it might scare a few people, might bring up a lot more questions on Jalen Hurts. So I think this year, it's gotten a little bit harder for Jalen Hurts, but he's going to have to still go out there and not prove himself, because I think he's proven it already going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. But he's just kind of has to remind everyone that, he's a great quarterback, great talent. You can question his arm, but as an athlete, as a good athlete at that position, I think he's among the top 7 to 5 most dangerous players at the quarterback position. I didn't say top 5 throwers of the position, because, you could argue a bunch of other quarterbacks that could throw it better than him. But in terms of scaring the defense, intimidating the defense, and keeping the defense on their toes, I don't think you get much better than Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts in that conversation because of what else they could bring, the creativity that they can bring, and the danger that they bring with their legs, that it keeps defenses guessing. They don't know who has the ball, if they're going to throw it, and if they do run it, they're huge. Jalen Hurts is a huge guy like Josh Allen. It's not going to take 1 or 2 players to bring him down. All of that is wrapped up in a good, talented player that Jalen Hurts is. But this year is going to be crucial to get over that hurdle and get this Eagles offense back to humming like they were that season that they made it to the Super Bowl. They have a lot of things to figure out, but I am pretty confident in the Eagles to figure it out. Really in an NFC that's not too top-heavy, and I'm sure they'll make the playoffs, but it's how they perform in there. After an ugly loss last season to the Bucs, how they come back from that and get everyone involved and look like the team that I believe they can be. But anyways, I'll leave it at that with that segment, and we'll be moving on to the last segment of the show. Not before I go to a quick break here, the last break of the show, and on the other side of it, I'll bring you all the questions that still remain after the franchise tag deadline. What the heck are the Giants doing? How long before one of these running backs are signed? And which quarterback move is going to cause the biggest ripple in free agency? All that, my thoughts on it, coming up next.